So last week we started Hebrews. Our focus is Jesus being our greater anchor. That's our motif throughout the series. The book of Hebrews addresses a real condition that I believe all people, myself included, yourself included, are going to struggle with, you're going to deal with, and we call this spiritual drift. At some point, you are going to ask your soul this question: is it worth it? Is it worth it to open my Bible? Is it worth it to pray? Is it worth it to treat people, especially those who hurt me, the way that Jesus told me to? Is it worth coming to church? Is it worth serving? Is it worth giving? Is there a better anchor out there than Jesus? Is there someone or is there something that can take better care of me, that can make my life more satisfying, sweeter, more entertaining, and fulfilling? Last week, we saw at the end of our service, Jesus invite us to come and to rest in him. Anyone who is weary, for the drifter, the heavy laden, we can come to him and find rest. He wants us to take his yoke upon himself. And what that means in biblical language is that Jesus identifies himself with you so much, all of your highs and all of your lows, that he would take your burdens upon himself. We saw that Jesus, even though he's God and creator, he is also humble and he is gentle. So the question is Jesus good enough? Is Jesus strong enough? Because if not, there are alternatives and options galore out there, are there not, that you can turn to right now in this moment. And they offer immediate fixes, do they not? They are physically present. Whereas Jesus, unless it's through the church, is not physically present. You can get an immediate high from these things. If you're looking for dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, adrenaline, or whatever chemical of choice that you turn to right now for an immediate fix, you can get it for your nerves and you can get it for your anxieties. Can you not? Right now. The message of Hebrews stands in sharp contrast to this. There is no dope like Jesus. There's no adrenaline like Jesus. Dope, oxytocin, serotonin, none of these things compare to Jesus. You see, Jesus, there's no greater anchor than Jesus because he is both God and man at the same time. No other anchor is omnipotent yet humble. There's no other anchor that is transcendent, holy other, yet condescends and stoops down to us. Throughout our series, we are developing this nautical motif. And in this motif, you're the ship. Life is a voyage. You are on a journey from one destination to the next, from life to eternal life. And you must have an anchor that is strong enough to do two things, at least this morning, that we're going to focus on. Number one, you must have an anchor that is able to withstand your weight. Right? What's the point of having an anchor if it can't hold you? You see, there is no other human being, and honestly, there's no other human activity that can sustain the weight of who you are. Whether it's your marriage, your children, your friendships, your hobbies, none of those things were designed to fully sustain the weight of who you are. Put enough pressure on them. Put enough of your weight on them and you will see each and every one of them bend, break, and snap. God did put them into your life, but he put them into your life for a different reason. There must be a greater anchor. So that's number one. Number two, your anchor not only must be able to sustain your weight, but add on to this all the combined weight and pressure and tension of every single storm, all the pressure, all the friction, all the anxiety that has come your way, is coming your way, and will come your way in the future. See, in this life, you're going to experience high highs and low lows, right? And everything in between. You're going to win and you're going to lose. You're going to watch people come into your life and say, I love you, I will follow you anywhere, and 7 years later, they're gone. Right? You will watch your loved ones die. You are maybe perhaps going to get married and have kids, and maybe by God's grace have grandkids. High highs and low lows. You may lose jobs, and you may lose money. you're going to deal in one degree or another with pressure and anxiety and affliction and tension and strife. And if you do not have an anchor strong enough for all of this, you are going to drift away from Jesus and away from the church. Or even worse, you're going to shipwreck yourself, which is a big theme in the book of Hebrews. But we stop and we pause right now. We remember what Augustine says, that God created you for himself, and your heart is going to be restless until your heart finds its rest in him. This voyage is meant to end on the shores of eternity where faith becomes sight. This voyage is not meant to end in the shipwreck of your faith. And that's why the writer of Hebrews wrote to this original audience. And that is why we are going through this, however long it may take. Because the danger is, even in a church this size, that we are just on the cusp of shipwreck. There are people who were much more interested in Jesus 10 years ago than they are today. There are people that are much more interested in Jesus 1 year ago than what they are today. And all this proves that spiritual drift is real. And all you need to do to drift away from God is nothing. It's the easiest thing to do. There is no greater anchor than Jesus. And Hebrews addresses 2 reasons why, in addition to last week, that Jesus is a greater anchor, that there's no greater anchor than Jesus. Let's get started with our big idea, our proposition. There is no greater anchor than Jesus to fight against drift, because he is the king who sacrifices himself to secure you. Can you imagine any governmental leader that would give up his life, empty himself of all of his riches and grandeur and stature for little old you and me? But not just the king of a nation, but the king of the universe would do this for you, to secure you and lock you down. Why is Jesus the greater anchor? Number 1, Jesus is a greater anchor because of his final and his finished work for you as your high priest. Jesus is the priest that ends the priesthood of all former days. In ancient times, in the first couple centuries of the church, before pastors somehow became priests, about 300 or 400 years later, non-Christians would go up to Christians and ask, "Where's your priest?" I mean, you go to Athens, you go to the Parthenon, and there's a priest for Athena. You go to Ephesus, and you go to the temple, there's a priest for Artemis. You go to Corinth, right, and you go to the temple at Corinth, and there's a priest for Aphrodite. So these people would go to Christians and say, "Well, where is your priest? You're a religious person. Where's your priest?" And the Christian would say, "We have no priest, because Jesus is our priest." Jesus is the sacrifice to end all sacrifices. So in ancient times, people would go up to these Christians and say, "Where is your sacrifice?" I mean, we bring goats and we bring bulls and we slaughter them. It's a very bloody thing, ancient religion. Where's your sacrifice? Christians didn't sacrifice. And they would respond and say, "Jesus is our sacrifice, and he already sacrificed himself." Jesus is a greater anchor because of his final and finished work for us as our great high priest. But number 2, Jesus is a greater anchor because of his complete and his sovereign rule over all of existence as its king. Jesus is king. He is strong and mighty. And because of that, there's no greater anchor that you can attach the ship of your life to. There's no greater anchor who can sustain your weight and the combined weight of all the things you may weather on this voyage of life. Marriage, family, hobbies, entertainment, romance, friendships, wealth, career, substances, all of these anchors are not strong enough to sustain you when the storms of life come. The chain that's attached to your ship and that you attach to these lesser anchors, it's going to snap. They were not designed to hold the weight of all that who you are. God did not create them to be your anchor. The good things in life, marriage, family, friendship, rest, food, serve a different function in your life than being your anchor. You were made for God himself, and your heart will be restless until you give up the ghost and you find your rest in Jesus. So if you are drifting today, even though you made it to this place today, great job, you're here. If you are drifting from Jesus, and if you are drifting from his church today, even if you're literally present in this room, I pray that you find Jesus, priest and king, to be the anchor that you really need. Let's begin. Let's get to our first point. We're going to see our first point. We're going to focus on Jesus as priest. Jesus is greater anchor because his finished sacrifice secures your soul. Last week we saw that Jesus is God, creator, and sustainer. He's the exact representation of his glory. Jesus creates all things by speaking it into being. We looked at Genesis 1, John 1, Hebrews 1, Colossians 1. All in concert, Jesus is the God who created all things. Jesus sustains you, all things, you and me, by the power of his word. And now we see that Jesus is a greater anchor because he is our priest. In ancient times, priests served as the mediator between the natural world and the supernatural world. It doesn't matter if it's tribal religion or some of the more complex world religions. Most of the religions of antiquity had some sort of priest as a mediator. A shaman, priest, some kind. You are not strong enough to communicate to the supernatural world, so there was a mediator. In Judaism, the Levites, which were the priestly tribe of Israel, were the mediators between their cousins and God. And the Hebrews writer claims that Jesus is the priest to end all priests. Because Jesus, as God and King, can do something finally and fully for you that no earthly priest can do. We're going to get into that over the course of our preaching series. Jesus, because he is man, he can actually die. He can sacrifice himself. He can decrease. Jesus' sacrifice, because he is God, can do something for us that no priest could ever do. His sacrifice, therefore, is final and it is finished. One of his very last words on the cross, it is finished. And because his work for us is final and finished, we can have certainty today. We can have assurance that he can hold us fast through anything, like we sang in the hymn last Sunday. So let's take a look at the end of verse 3 and verse 4. The writer says that when he, Jesus, made purification of sins, that he sat down at the right hand of majesty on high, having become as much better than the angels, as he inherited a more excellent name than they. Right here we see that Jesus isn't only God, creator, and sustainer, but Jesus is our priest. He is the priest to end all priests. Jesus is the final priest, and he completes redemption of God's people, and he does it through self-sacrifice. That's how he purifies. That's how he makes us clean again. This catharsis in Greek. The original audience of Hebrews were ethnic and religious Jews who became Christians. And they would be familiar with the function of a priest. Whereas us in our culture, unless you grew up Catholic, this is a foreign concept for you. But they would be familiar with the priestly duties in Jerusalem's temple. Now, right here, the writer tells us that after Jesus worked to redeem us and restore us, purify us, we read that Jesus sat down at the right hand of majesty on high. Do you see that at the end of verse 3? This is unusual for Jewish Christians to hear, growing up in their culture and their former religion. You see, the Jewish temple, as far as we understand, there could be some archaeological dig tomorrow to change this, but we believe that in the temple proper, it did not have a chair for priests to sit down. They were always standing, always working, always serving, performing their duties. But Jesus, after performing his priestly duty, he sits down in a chair. He sits down at God's right hand. This is meant to signal and clue us in that Jesus' work of redemption, unlike any other human priest that keeps on working, keeps on serving, keeps on sacrificing, his work as priest is finished. It is final. It is complete. Jesus is the final priest. And Hebrews later on will call Jesus the great high priest of the order of Melchizedek. We're going to get to that this year. But because his priestly work for you is final and it is finished, this means you can have security in this life. You don't have to spend your next year wondering, how bad did I mess up this year with God? Maybe I should bring a couple more lambs with me to Jerusalem this year, right? We don't have to play this uncertainty with God. Final, total, finished. You do not need any other mediator or any other anchor. No matter what storm comes your way, no matter how the winds may howl and blow and toss you, you're going to be okay. That's what this means. Jesus is a shore, and he is a steady anchor. Now, we need to focus for a moment, and then we'll expand on it in our second and final point. We need to focus for a minute on where Jesus sat down. Because though he is a priest, we don't see him sitting down in a temple, right? We see Jesus sitting down at the right hand of majesty on high. And what this means is that Jesus is not only a priest, Jesus is royalty. Jesus is king. We see here that Jesus, because he is God and man, he serves, therefore, what we would call different offices. Yes, Jesus is priest, but Jesus is also king, which is the subject of our next point. But in ancient times, a priest couldn't be a king, and a king couldn't be a priest. Priests in ancient Israel were from the tribe of Levi, but kings were from the tribe of Judah. But Jesus is both priest and king, because Jesus alone is the true Israel. Now, I want to address a misconception. Now, some take phrases like this in the Bible. Well, one, they come to the Bible with a critical eye, seeking to disprove that Jesus is God. But they will look at verses like this and say, because Jesus sits at God's right hand, Jesus is less than God. Do you get that logic? He's not like the centerpiece of the kingdom. He's at the right hand of the centerpiece of kingdom. I want to address this misconception. This is not what the writer intends to teach. That shows bias coming to the book. The right hand is an ancient image of the source of someone's power and sovereignty. Whoever sits at the king's right hand is the very power of God himself, or the king. The Hebrews writer is claiming that Jesus is the very power of God. And that is going to be consistent with this message throughout the letter. And honestly, though we're just 3 verses in, it's already consistent. Last week, we saw that Jesus is the power behind creation. He is the word that spoke it all into being, and he is the word that is sustaining it right now, sustaining you. Whether you care about Jesus or not, he is sustaining you right now. Whether you're drifting from God or not, he is sustaining you right now. Jesus creates all things, sustains all things through the power of his word. Now, the writer establishes a relationship between Jesus and angels. Do you see that in verse 4? The writer claims that Jesus is better than angels. Now, why does the writer do this? This is in his introduction to his audience. Why is he talking about angels right now? And why spend so much time talking about angels in the next verses? He claims that Jesus is better than angels. Why is he doing this? And here's what this means. There were some in the writer's original audience who were drifting away from Jesus, and they were drifting away from church because of their fascination with the supernatural, especially with angels. That's still alive today. We have this theological system called angelology, and you get to study all the different angels and their names and their functions. A lot of people dabble in that. These people did. And it was a source of spiritual drift for them. We're going to get into this more, into point 2, but for now you need to know that even the very first generation of Christians struggled with spiritual drift. And these were the people that either saw the resurrection of Jesus with their own eyes, or they were discipled by the people who walked with Jesus themselves. It's a pretty amazing pedigree, and they failed. A part of this struggle, though, with drift is when someone or when something captures your attention, captures your imagination, captures your affection more than Jesus. That's when drift starts. Jesus is a greater anchor than any other option because no other option is God, creator, sustainer, and priest who sacrifices himself to ensure your eternal security. Now, here's how this connects to drift, our big motif for the series. Drift happens when you turn to other mediators in your life, other priests in your life. Drift happens when you act as if someone or something can take better care of you than how Jesus can for you right now. That's when drift happens. Eventually, that thing becomes your priest, becomes your mediator, becomes your anchor in this life. And you have to check yourself right now and say, is there anything in my life right now that captures my imagination, that captures my fascination, that captures my affections more than Jesus? You see, drift happens when you maybe use Jesus, dabble in Jesus, plus a little something on the side to help you deal with your flaws, to deal with your insecurities, to deal with your anxieties, to deal with your mistakes, to deal with your failures. In reality, Hebrews and the gospel says you only need Jesus and his full and final priestly work of sacrifice on your behalf. And drift happens when you act as if Jesus' work is unfinished. That, okay, you got your church on this morning, but then you're going to go out today and have some other experiences to lock you down in this life. That's Jesus plus. Once again, there's no one or no thing else that can add or can complete what Jesus has done for you in the cross and in the resurrection. No one and no thing else is needed to secure you on this voyage of life, from life to eternal life. All the storms, all the obstacles. So it kind of looks like this. So imagine you are the ship, you drop the anchor, right? You kind of feel it hit, kind of latch, but then you're like, you know what? I don't know if it's really going to hold us. So you keep pulling the anchor up. You keep trying to find the spot that you think is going to hold you through the storm. That is thinking that you need Jesus plus something else. When in reality, long ago, long before you were even born, and whatever you're experiencing right now, Jesus sacrificed himself for you to make you right with God and to eternally secure your soul. He is seated at the right hand of God right now, and it is finished. No greater anchor. All that is left in this life truly is enjoying all that God has done for you in Jesus, and then watching, as we sang moments ago, like watching and waiting to see how God is going to take care of us in this Godward life until our death or until Jesus returns. And we say Maranatha. Amen? Let's get to our second point. So, greater anchor because he's a priest. Now we see that Jesus is greater anchor because he is the eternal King who rules over all things. There's no greater anchor than Jesus for your soul, because he is God, creator, sustainer, the final priest who mediates your restoration, your reconciliation with his Father by sacrificing himself. No other person will do this for you. No other person has the power to do this for you. Now we see that Jesus is greater anchor because he's the King. Now remember, some of this original audience of Hebrews were drifting away from Jesus. They were drifting away from church because of their fascination with the supernatural, their fascination with angels. Other things held their imagination and therefore their attention better than Jesus. And the Hebrews writer helps us see that Jesus is better than the angels because he's the creator and the king of the angels. And because Jesus is king, he has complete and sovereign rule over all things, especially angels. Dr. Sproul would say something like this: there is no maverick molecule. Jesus is sovereign over all. Angels are strong and mighty, beyond what we can imagine. That's why when human beings will come into contact with them, they are on the ground face down. They think they're ruined. They're going to be dead. They're terribly majestic. But Jesus makes the splendor and the might of angels look like they're simply playing with Nerf guns. Sometimes it's comical compared to true power. Now, to help Jewish Christians who are drifting, the writer goes into reference mode. 7 Old Testament scriptures to prove one point. Jesus is king, he is creator of the angels, and they love and serve and worship him. So don't worship the angels. Don't worship the supernatural. Don't be so more fascinated with lesser things you miss the point. In verse 5, the writer says, "To which of the angels did he ever say?" And that's kind of the motif of the rest of the chapter. He quotes mostly from the Psalms, 1 2 Samuel and 1 Isaiah, if I remember correctly, for one point. Jesus is better than the angels. Jesus is better than angels because he is God's only begotten Son, and no other angel can claim this. God is the creator of angels, but he's not the father of angels. God has one Son, and one Son alone, and that's Jesus Christ. Angels are not the children of God. The old word simply means that they are messengers of God. Terrible, majestic, powerful, not omnipotent. We see Daniel's angel was pushed back by the prince of Persia. They're not omnipotent. They're terribly strong. Now, some may say, if Jesus is God's Son, doesn't that make Jesus inferior to God? And the answer is no. And here's why. Last week I quoted to you the ancient Nicene Creed, which is what Catholics recite in Mass week in and week out. Us as Baptists, I think we're afraid of creeds and catechisms because we don't want to seem too liturgical. We're okay with it here, and we will use the great creeds every so often. But Jesus is God from God, true light from true light, eternally God, begotten and not made. The distinction begotten and not made is critical here. Jesus is begotten of God. He's not created by God. And that sets the difference between us and Mormons. No matter how much they may say they're Christians, they are not. And from Jehovah's Witnesses. Because Jesus is uncreated. You have to keep that in mind. The distinction is critical. Because Jesus is uncreated, he has always existed. Because Jesus is uncreated, he can be the creator. Do you get that logic? There has to be a beginning. There has to be a first creator, first domino. And the gospel claims that Jesus is the first domino. If there was something before him, that would be God. Angels are created by Jesus. Jesus is begotten, not made. Begotten is a reference to his birth, when he took on flesh, not his existence. It's meant to set up this relationship that everything that God does, Ancient of Days, he does for his Son, that the Son is the centerpiece of all things. So in verses 6 and 7, the writer seeks to show us that the angels worship Jesus. Angels worship Jesus, adore Jesus, love Jesus, live for Jesus, because he is their creator. If you look at Scripture, every time a human being encounters an angel, the response is an attempt to worship. They get down on their knees, they feel the terror, they feel the majesty, and they try to worship. They are majestic, they're strong, they're mighty, but usually the angel will tell the person, like, get up. He does this to John in Revelation, like, get up, stop, and redirects to Jesus. Why? Because Jesus is greater than the angels. Now in verses 8 and 9, the writer tells us that Jesus is the eternal king. This is why he quotes from 2 Samuel. that God gave his promise to the first real, true king of Jerusalem, that a son of his is going to be able to have the ability to rule forever. That's why he had to be begotten from one of the sons of David. Jesus' throne is forever, and Jesus has a scepter. And the scepter is a symbol of rule and of power. And this scepter is righteousness, which the writer then says, like, Jesus loves righteousness and he hates lawlessness. And what this means is that Jesus cares more about justice than you do. People cut you off, right? You don't think you get the proper pay. Prices are going up. What's going around the world? What's happened to you personally? Jesus cares more about justice than you do. That's what this means. Jesus is better than angels because Jesus is the king who executes justice. And he uses angels for that purpose. Angels love and serve Jesus. Now in verses 10 through 12, the writer tells us that Jesus was before the beginning. The old theological term was called the aseity of God, the endlessness of God. He always was and is and will be. Jesus is the eternal king, and he laid out the foundations of the earth. The heavens and the earth are the work of Jesus' hands. And the heavens and the earth, as it is, are temporary. There's almost like it's like canvas that he can roll up, and he's going to renew and restore and then roll back out. One day they will be renewed, but Jesus is forever. And then in verse 13, the writer helps us see that God the Father has never spoken about an angel the way that he speaks about Jesus, my one and only begotten. No one sits at God's right hand. Only the Son does. Conclusion, Jesus is better than anything you're fixated on in the supernatural right now. Jesus is better than the angels. If you are going to be fascinated by someone or something, if someone is going to hold your attention this morning, your imagination this morning, and therefore your affection, let it be the best of all things, right? But we know, as C.S. Lewis says, that we are content making mud pies in the slum when the offer of a true holiday is presented to us, because we are far too easily pleased. But if you're going to be fascinated by something or someone, let it be Jesus, because there is no one like him. Eternal God and King who creates all things and sustains all things, who rules all things by the power of his word. Let it be Jesus. There's no one like Jesus, the final priest who sacrifices himself to secure your restoration. There is no one like Jesus, the complete sovereign of the universe, who is also gentle and humble and just wants you to come to him for rest today. Now here's the point for us. You may not be interested in angels this morning. You may or may not be interested in some part of the supernatural. That may not be your thing. But we are all fascinated by something. We are all fascinated by something. Someone or something competes with your fascination, your imagination, your attention, and therefore your affection for Jesus. And the key to fighting spiritual drift is knowing what it is. Oh, what was that old thing? Was it G.I. Joe's? Knowing is half the battle. Do you remember that, Ryan? Do you remember that? It was G.I. Joe's? Yes! I made the illusion. I love it. Knowing your heart and what is capturing your fascination is half the battle for drift. The key to fighting spiritual drift is knowing what it is and then recounting to yourself time and time again that Jesus is better. That yes, you drop that anchor down. Jesus is down there doing the work. He's going to hold. He's going to hold. It's okay. Now, you may be somebody that says, you know what? I can't focus on the Bible, though. I have a hard time reading the Bible. I don't pray. I feel like I just can't pray. I can't focus on prayer. However, you sure can watch that TV show for 42 minutes, right? You can still watch that hour, 54-minute movie. And you sure can scroll on social media for a long time. Vernon said, not me. Not me. Why? Why can you do this? Because those things In the final analysis, they fascinate you more than the God who created all things, who created you, who is sustaining you right now by his word, and that is spiritual drift. Let's talk about two more dimensions of drift this morning. Number one, drift happens when someone or something captures your imagination, your fascination, your affection, your attention more than Jesus. All right? That's when spiritual drift happens. So therefore, we figure out what's pulling the strings right now. That's your God. That's your functional God. Even if you're in this room, you can be in this room and have a different functional God than Jesus Christ. Then number two, drift happens when you do not see Jesus as the complete sovereign of the universe that he created. Drift begins to happen in your soul when you no longer see Jesus as the complete sovereign of the universe that he created. If the ship of your life is going to be attached to something immovable, if it's not going to be attached by something immovable, you know what's going to happen? There one day will be a greater force that's going to move you, and it's going to move your anchor. You see that? Even if it's fascination with an angel, even if it's fascination with the supernatural, even if it's a fascination with any created thing. I often talk to you about Augustine, and I often talk to you about Augustine's idea and his teaching on misordered loves. And I think it's critical for us to revisit here before we move on. Augustine teaches that your deepest problem and my deepest problem as human beings is misordering our loves and desires. And so we constantly have to be doing a little heart check. And what he would say is it's not that you're loving whatever it is too much. That's not the issue. Because we're created to enjoy. It's not that you're loving those things too much. It's that you're loving Jesus less in comparison. That's the problem. I will drift, and you will drift, when we make our anchor anyone or anything else than Jesus. So it's not that I love Tisa too much, I love filet too much, or I love y'all too much. It's that I love Jesus too little. That's the critical part for Augustine. If I attach the chains of my ship to an anchor that is not immovable, we are both going to be moved. So here's the question. Are you tired of drift yet? Some of y'all have been drifting for a year. Some of you have been drifting for 10 plus years. Some of y'all, you may say, I feel like I've been drifting my whole life. Are you tired of drift yet? Are you tired of attaching the chains of your life to lesser anchors? Reorder your loves. Reorder your desires today. And that just simply begins by asking God to do the work. The work is already done. Jesus did it on the cross. He is your priest. But it has to be appropriated in this moment experientially. Are you tired of throwing anchors into the ocean that cannot hold you fast? Are you tired of the anchor being pulled with you instead of securing you through the storm? Take a look at your desires. They are misordered. Jesus first, and then you get the wonderful privilege of seeing all the good things God has given to you and figuring out how to order them next. Isn't that fun? Jesus first, he's given me all of this good stuff in this life, and here's how I'm going to appropriate the rest of my time and affections. That's it. Jesus is not asking you to love people or to enjoy life less. Jesus is telling you you were created to love him more. That's what he's telling you today. He is better than anyone or anything that you are fascinated by or that's holding your attention and your imagination more than him right now. None of those things are going to anchor you in the storm. Right? No one's going to say when the great storm of life comes, I should have put in more overtime. I should have had more Sunday brunch. No one says stuff like that. Inferior anchors. Now, as Christians, you are going to feel pressure. You are going to feel trouble. You are going to feel tribulation, distress, anxiety, and more. You will feel pressure between you, the ship, the line, and the anchor. But this is what I want to encourage you to think through right now. The pressure that you feel as a Christian is not proof that Jesus is failing. It is proof that Jesus is holding you fast. Okay? Whatever pressure you may feel today, if you are a Christian, he's not going to buckle. It's just a sign he is holding you fast. There's no greater anchor than Jesus because his finished sacrifice for you as priest and his complete and total and sovereign rule over the universe as your king secures your soul eternally.